The Filipino Navy moved to illegally detain a Chinese fishing boat. Innocent fishermen were forced to admit to illegal invasion. Those refused were held at gunpoint, forced to take off their shirts as they stood under the scorching sun. Historically, the Nansha Islands or the Spratly Islands have been Chinese territory. The Chinese first discovered, named, and administered the islands. From over 2,000 years ago, Chinese people have lived and worked on these territories as they fished, planted, traded, paid taxes, maintained order, and recorded the histories of the South China Sea. After the Second World War, according to the Cairo Declaration and the terms of Japanese surrender, the Chinese government recovered territorial control in the South China Sea from foreign invaders. In 1946, ceremonies were held as the Chinese authority on board the Allies' naval fleet formally reclaimed sovereignty over the Xisha and Nansha Islands. In 1948, the Chinese government published a map of the South China Sea with U-shaped line. Since then, numerous maps and books published by countries all over the world clearly marked these territories as Chinese. That was the post-war international consensus. But by 1970s, as international trade boomed, the routes through these oceans gained strategic importance, and substantial oil and gas deposits were also discovered. A few countries came to occupy over 40 Nansha Islands. The Philippines mounted military campaigns to occupy 8 islands and built runways and military facilities there, and even demanded sovereignty over the Huangyan Island or the Scarborough Shoal. Such provocation was how territorial disputes between China and the Philippines came to be. In 1999, the Filipino Navy grounded an old naval ship on the beach of Renai Reef, citing a lack of spare parts as the reason for not being able to move it. But 15 years later, the Filipino Foreign Ministry openly admitted that the grounding of the ship was exactly meant to occupy the reef. In order to maintain a much-needed stable international environment for economic development, China exercised great restraints over such provocation. In 2002, a declaration was signed between China and the 10 ASEAN member countries, including the Philippines, with a commitment to the freedom of navigation and overflight in the region, and all agreed to resolve disputes through direct consultation and peaceful means. But after the United States decided to pivot to Asia in 2009, things changed. The US was to pour 60% of its naval and air force into the region and has made a point to tighten military cooperation with the Philippines. All of these in the name of protecting the freedom of navigation. The irony is, China is the largest trading nation in the world and in history ever. China relies on the freedom of navigation more than anyone. Till this day, no one has pointed to any evidence of China disrupting the freedom of navigation. In 2012, the Filipino Navy detained unarmed Chinese fishermen near the Huangyan Island. They were eventually freed by the Chinese patrol ship. The Philippines then decided to disregard China's request to negotiate and unilaterally submitted its case for arbitration under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. The Chinese sees this as an attempt to legitimize what is essentially illegal occupation, and therefore refuses to participate or to recognize the proceedings. So what exactly are the Philippines' claims? The Philippines are saying that certain islands are not quite an island as defined by UNCLOS. They are what's called low tide elevation, because they would submerge underwater during high tides. Therefore, that is not land, quote-unquote. And if it's not land, then there is no territorial sovereignty to be claimed. Also, once it's not land, then it's a part of the ocean and thereby belongs to the Philippines, because a country may enjoy up to 200 miles of exclusive economic zone from the baseline of its coast. This is clever. They know that there is no denying of China's historic rights, so they are making this out to be a dispute over the legal definition of land or sea. But it is an attack on sovereignty in disguise. UNCLOS was designed to manage the relationship among sovereign nations' maritime rights. Sovereignty is the basis of it all. Without clarifying sovereignty, be it high tide or low tide, there is simply no basis to argue whether it's an island or not. It would be nothing but a rock with no standing in the court of international law. In fact, there has never been a case where the definition of a territorial feature was determined while bypassing the question of who owns it. So why would the Philippines need to draw up this elaborate case to put sovereignty dispute in disguise? Because UNCLOS does not have jurisdiction over territorial sovereignty. Respect for sovereignty is the foundation of international law. China has declared in 2006 that it would exclude disputes concerning not just sovereignty, but also maritime delimitation from compulsory arbitration under UNCLOS. In fact, more than 30 countries, including the UK, France and Russia, have made such declarations, and UNCLOS specifically allows for such exemptions. If China had taken part in this arbitration, it would greatly undermine the validity of UNCLOS and set precedents for others to simply bypass the fundamental building block of international law and to challenge sovereignty and to put in jeopardy this hard-earned post-war international order. China sees this arbitration as a typical case of abuse of international law. The truth is, the intention of UNCLOS is to encourage diplomatic talks. It is clearly stated that as long as direct talks are possible, compulsory arbitration is out of the question. China has repeatedly requested a dialogue with the Philippines, but to no avail. The Filipino government claimed that they were unable to resolve the issues through bilateral talks. But a former senior government official recently admitted that this was all a blatant lie. China has always insisted that direct talks are the best ways to resolve international disputes. 50 years ago, China had border disputes with 14 countries, but now 12 of the 14 have been successfully resolved through peaceful negotiations. This whole South China Sea arbitration fiasco is a complete disregard of international law and historic facts. China insists on doing it the right way. Disputes can be resolved peacefully. Confrontational policy and military threats do not lead to a better world. There is an old Chinese saying, a close neighbor is more reliable than a distant relative. We are neighbors, so let's talk.